Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead. Welcome to episode 165, Generating Writing During a Writing Session. A while back, I wrote an article for Inside Higher Ed about, it was titled, What Do Professors Do During a Writing Session? And the reason I asked that question as kind of the launching point for the article was because this is something that I had wondered about for a long time. It's been the basis of my research now going on 8 or 9 years. I'm really fascinated about what faculty, graduate students do when they actually sit down to write. How do they generate articles? How do they decide what they're going to put as the very next sentence? What do they do when they start writing and then all of a sudden the writing stops? How do they get writing going again? All of these questions are of interest to me. And for a project I did for a while back for this article, I actually asked around and I said, what do you do? What do you do when you go there? And, you go to the library, you go to your office, you go to the coffee shop. And one of the things that I found in that, or that I reported in this article, and I will link to it in the show notes because it's got lots of really interesting stuff in there. But one of the things that I found is that there isn't a single answer. And I think we all probably suspected that anyway. But I think the way that we're taught to think about doing scholarly writing is that, we have to generate books, articles, publications, lab reports, whatever it is. And somehow when we sit down in the chair at our laptops, or maybe if we're doing it by hand, automatically words are just going to come. They're just going to shoot out of your fingers and there you go. And an article will just write itself. And this is one of the reasons why we have a lot of business at Defend, Publish, and Lead, because that it isn't that simple. Not that many people are able to immediately sit down. It's time to start writing. I scheduled in writing from 9 a.m. to 10:30 a.m. What happens when the writing doesn't come? Or, a lot of us will sit there and we're doing maybe a little writing, we're doing some revising, we're messing around with a sentence, but I think a lot of us also struggle with the feeling, is this what I'm supposed to be doing now? Am I writing? Am I writing enough? Was this writing session productive? There's not a way to really answer these questions. So of course, I get totally geeked out by this kind of a research. But these are some of the things in our podcast, which is emphasizing lots of practical, usable tips that hopefully you can use right, today. If you're listening to this while you're driving and you're going to do some writing today, I'm just today going to talk through a whole bunch of things that people do during writing sessions. And maybe one of these will strike your fancy and give you some inspiration. So one of the things that people do during a writing session, I would say one of the more common ones that I've heard is to have some way to actually trigger writing to happen. And I know in one of our previous episodes, we talked about opening a writing session. This is not that same thing. Opening a writing session is just, what are the things you do right before you start the kind of the real legit work of your writing session that get you ready to do it? So for me, it's a walk up the stairs with my cup of coffee, find my spot in the library, open my laptop, and so on. And I described a little bit of it in that episode. This is not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is, what are the things that get you to actually generate writing during a writing session? And so here's a whole bunch of things that fall in that category. Many people look at the writing they did the day before, read it to figure out where they were. And that's enough to kind of remind them where they left off, or enough to get them interested in writing again. And then they know what to do. That, you can't say, well, they just start with the very next sentence. That's not always the case. They might start somewhere else in the draft. But doing that reading of what they wrote the previous day or the previous 2 days sometimes is a way to get started. I found for me, that's not particularly helpful because I take weekends totally off. So the gap between writing Friday morning and Monday morning for me is too big. I'm a whole different person by the time the weekend has already passed. So I don't find that strategy a way to actually get writing going. But that is one way some people are able to do it. I think this definitely would work well if you're somebody that has a lot of frequent contact with your writing. So for example, if you're somebody that writes in these little like bits and spurts, maybe you're just going to read that last paragraph you wrote or the last 3 sentences, and then you know what to do if you're, say, writing in these very small pockets of time during your day. Another thing that people do to get writing is they try to answer questions about their writing that are bigger questions. So they could be something as broad as, what is my theoretical framework here? Or why is it that landforms do this special thing when they, evolve, or what they have some kind of a big guiding question. And I have heard of faculty or dissertation writers actually write those questions down, and they kind of have them with them all the time. Like, these are the things my work is trying to answer. And so they will look at the writing that they're either starting to do and write from those questions, or they'll look at the work they already have that is written and then use those questions as a way to kind of understand, is my writing actually answering these questions? So it's a good way to look back and forth. So questions are another great way to get in. I've talked before about one of my favorite tools, the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank. I know people are super tired of hearing me talk about this resource, but let me posit that this is also a way to generate writing. I've actually used this with many of our clients who are stuck, that have writer's block. So for anybody that's audio only, I am going to share a screen, I think. Let's see if we can make it happen. And what I find with using the Manchester Phrase Bank is that, oh, hold on. There we go. Sorry for the pause there. I was just a little bit surprised about what showed up on my screen. So people that are on YouTube, you could watch it. It's kind of funny. All right. So for what I like about this is that it's basically a phrase bank of academic phrases that are used all the time. But here's where I think it could help you generate writing. And I've pitched this to a lot of people that are stuck, because I'll say, well, where is the spot that you are stuck in their writing? And so I just had this conversation with a client this morning about they're stuck because they're not sure how to describe their findings. And one of the really great things that I'm sharing on the screen right now, and I can show people that are on YouTube, but if you go to the phrase bank, there is a link for findings. So if you want to discuss your findings, and then on that page, there's all kinds of choices. And this is what I love about it for generating writing, because you can then decide, what is it I'm trying to do? Am I trying to restate a result? Am I trying to indicate an unexpected outcome? Here's where I got to today with the client I was working with. But one of the things that they were trying to do was explain their findings, because no one else had, or none of the other literature had really explained findings in the way that they needed to explain them. And lo and behold, the phrase bank has a section where it says offering an explanation for the findings. When you click on it, you get a drop down area with tons of ways to start sentences. These are wonderful for generating writing, because there's a lot of them here. I don't know how many are here, but plenty, like more than 20. So you could pick one of them. So one of them says a possible explanation for this might be, and then if you're the writer, you could just use that as the start of your sentence and then keep going with that. So they can be really generative in writing some pieces that you might do right inside of the draft you're working on. It might be external. Sometimes I'll use these externally I'll have a draft open in Microsoft Word. I'll go to the phrase bank, figure out what I want to do, open a new Microsoft Word draft, just as like a working spot where I figure out how I want to make a paragraph, and then I'll copy and paste and drop it back in. So that's something. It also, just looking at the phrase bank, you can see phrasing that might help clarify your thinking and then get you to write. So here's another one. This inconsistency may be due to, or these relationships might be partly explained by, and you just finish the sentence. So the Manchester Academic Phrase Bank, I think, is a really good one to have on hand. I use it a lot, sometimes for sentence generation, but sometimes to just kind of figure out, what am I trying to do when I'm trying to describe a trend? Am I trying to relate it to this other thing in the literature? Am I trying to talk about it as a new thing that no one else has talked about? Really great material. So Manchester Academic Phrase Bank is another thing that, or another tool that you can use to actually generate writing in a writing session. Some other ideas. For me, I've mentioned before that I like to sometimes outline material on whiteboards. And I will sometimes use that as a time to just kind of reorganize my thinking. So I might have a draft open, and then I'll re-outline a section on a whiteboard and figure out while I'm doing that, oh, I really needed to add this other piece that doesn't even exist in the outline yet. Sometimes I'll write that new bit of material, this new generated material on the whiteboard and then type it up into my notes. I'll move things around and so on. So sometimes I actually use that generation time to deal with some organizational problems that really are bigger questions in the direction of the manuscript. So that's something that I think can help generate writing. I know that there's, another way that you can generate writing is audio. I talk about InkPad and how much I love InkPad all the time, but one of the ways I've increasingly used it is to generate writing when I'm better talking about an issue than writing about it. So if somebody wanted to talk with me about something, I occasionally will say, can I just record this conversation while I talk to you? So I make sure that I capture the way I'm talking about something in a natural way. InkPad has a way to record your words. You can check out one of our podcast episodes on InkPad, but it allows you to do that. And what I love about it is it basically shows your voice basically writing on a little yellow pad in the app. And then you can download the note, email it to yourself, copy and paste, stick it in Microsoft Word or Google Docs or wherever. So you can generate writing in a writing session without ever touching any keyboard if that is better. I've had some writing sessions where I've walked because that was the only exercise I've gotten all week. I walked around the neighborhood and just dictated into my phone. It's not beautiful. It's not great content. It definitely needs to be cleaned up and edited, but sometimes I can explore questions and do it that way. Another way that you could think about generating writing during a writing session, if you're really struggling, is to look at the beginnings of all of the paragraphs and identify key sentences. This is something that we've talked about in other episodes. Tara Gray is a person that's really great for talking about identifying key sentences, and I will put a link to the show notes for that as well. There's a document all about how she does that in a book that she wrote a very long time ago called Publish and Flourish. But that's another thing that works really well to generate writing because it reveals quickly where your holes are in logic. So if you would highlight a sentence in every paragraph, that's basically the key organizational point in the paragraph. The goal is that you should be able to read just those sentences and get a good gist of the article. As soon as it breaks in your thinking or you don't know what's happening next, that's a sign you need to add a key sentence. You might need to break a paragraph in two and so on. And that's another way to generate content because usually something new has to be created around that. So those are some of the common ones. Here's some other ones that happen to generate writing in a writing session. You certainly can move from, let's say, conference slides to an article draft. That's something that we have got as an ongoing resource for Defend, Publish, and Lead. We have this really great series, $25, 5 videos to just check out how to turn a conference slides into an article. One of the things I really like about the way that this happens, and I actually do it myself in all 5 of these videos, you can actually see me moving from some printed conference notes / slides into an article draft. One of the things I like about that is it replicates the process of building a draft because you've already put in some of those organizational bones in a conference presentation, and you're by necessity limited a little bit on time. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes. That's another way to get some writing completed. Not just using conference slides as a mechanism, but also even having somebody guide you through it. Here's step by step how you build this article. That's what those slides do. And there's other resources like that will say, here's how to do a scientific article. Here's how to do this other kind of thing. And sometimes for people generating writing, you can't think of how to do it yourself. I found that for some genres that are tough for me, like for example, writing a grant, I will always go to some kind of step-by-step guide. Like, here's the next thing you need to do in the grant, not just the function of the writing, but somebody actually saying, okay, this section is the background. Here's how you build a background section in a grant. That's how it is with these conference slides videos, if you're interested. So I'll put a link to those in the show notes. A couple other things that sometimes are really helpful. One thing that I think sometimes works is having a conversation with somebody that's interested in your project before a writing session. So if you can, this is sometimes you got to do it. I would argue probably within like a 1 to 2 day period. But if you could say schedule a morning coffee with somebody or a lunch with somebody the day before writing, and you actually talk through your projects, a lot of times that can be generative if you can talk with them about these are some of the things I'm thinking about. What do you think? Listen to what they say. What are some suggestions that they might have to get writing moving? And then take those suggestions into your writing session. Another way that I know I've talked about how I get writing generated is I do sometimes write inside my Asana project management system. Podcast episodes out about that. And I actually linked to it in the opening of writing session, so you can see more about it in that episode. That was one of our previous episodes in this series about writing sessions. But for me, I find the process of kind of thinking through the project parts generative, because then I realize, oh, I need to have this one piece. I need to start making this one piece. What does it look like? I'll do a little brainstorming about what it might look like in Asana. And a lot of times I can actually take that brainstorm and put it into a document and then start messing with it to make it into like a full-on paragraph or section or something like that. Other generative things that I think are really helpful. I always am a fan of looking at a model article or a model of what it is you're trying to build and taking some notes to see how close you are to that. Are you, is your literature review the same, roughly about the same length? Does it have kind of the same amount of sources? Those sorts of things. In some ways, are a little bit schematic. They might be, maybe flattening out the creative process of writing, but in a lot of ways, depending on the journal you want to get into, the whole idea is that your stuff looks similar to other people's. It's not, so different. So sometimes that can be really helpful in generating writing. And then finally, one of the best ways that I have found to generate writing, if I cannot do it, this isn't a writer's block episode, but let's just say you have the occasional writing session where you just are struggling. You just can't get writing generated. I have two thoughts about this, and both of which acknowledge that it's happening. So I think many of our clients will come to us because they're stuck, and that's fine. We have all kinds of ways to get you unstuck. If that's you, please reach out to us. We're happy to help. But let's just say you're just having an off day. So I've had this before where I've had 2 or 3 days of good writing, and then another day in the week it's just kind of difficult. I just my sentences are really slow. I know it's not totally what I want. For me, the best way that I can usually solve that problem is to stop writing and just get away from it for a little while. But I don't let myself off the hook and not look at it or think about it. Instead, what I'll do during that writing session is I feel like I always need to get some exercise. So I'll close everything up, pack it all up, and then I will go for a walk and just think about whatever it is that's going on in that writing, and just allow my brain a little bit more time before it's expected to be on demand shooting out all these great ideas. So for me, that has been very helpful. But one of the final strategies I want to leave you with is something that is in that article for Inside Higher Ed that I mentioned at the beginning of this episode, and that is about there's a suggestion in the article that's really cool. But basically, this one professor gives himself these passes. He makes, I think there's 12. I can't remember from the article, but maybe one a month. But it basically is like this note card. It's like a free pass. He only gets 12 of them. And let's say he has a hard writing session and he wants to quit. He only has 12 cards. So he's basically allowed to bail out on his writing once a month. And that's what this card is. It's a free pass to get out of writing. So maybe like a free homework pass from back in the time where you might have been in school. But what he, when I talked to this person about it, I thought this was really cool because there's this whole generative thing that happens, right? Because those 12 free homework passes or free get out of writing passes, they're valuable because there's only 12. So sometimes, this person was able to push through the writing because they realized, is this worthy of me? Is this problem right now with me not writing worthy of me giving up a free pass to get out of writing for today? And a lot of the times the answer was no. And then they were able to kind of push through and find a solution. So if that's something creative that you think you might want to do, I haven't done it yet, but I feel like something about having the tangible object of making, 12 note cards with 12 free passes on them and having them with you. That way, some days if you're really struggling or you're like, I cannot do this today, my brain hurts, I'm just tired of sitting here, I can't do it. You can give yourself the pass and basically throw it away because you've used it, pack your stuff up and go do what you want to do and not write at all in the writing session. So, okay, speaking of writing sessions, I do want to point out that our upcoming March series is all about writing sessions. So, I hope that you're interested in joining us. I think it'll be really productive because all of these things that I've been thinking about, what people do when they actually sit down and write, these are going to be some of the things that we cover in there, but more in depth. So, for example, one of the topics that will be discussed in our March series is this idea about how do you get a lot of writing done in a long stretch of writing? Because a lot of us need to take a whole day to write. Maybe you just have Fridays, or you have a whole weekend where everybody in your house is gone but you, and you've really got to get some work done. Or you're a dissertation student and you're, now overstayed your time clock by 2 years. You have one semester to get some things done. You've got to write a lot every day. How are you going to do that? So that's something that will be one of the topics in there. But also just some of these things like, okay, you're sitting in your writing session, it's going slowly. What can you do to pick up the pace? How can you get more things going? And the whole idea of this March series is this idea about how can we get more out of our writing sessions. So if you're interested in joining us, the link's in the show notes. You can check it out. You can also check it out on any time on Eventbrite. All of our events are posted there. Just look for Defend, Publish, and Lead. Happy writing this week.